We are very pleased to be here today with Dr. Scott Stoll. Dr. Stoll is the founder of the Plantrition Project, the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference, and the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention, and the Regenerative Health Institute, a unique collaborative project with the Rodale Institute. Dr. Stoll is the chairman of the board of the Plantrition Project and the chief medical director for the Ruby Cooking School. In a sentence, there's very little that Dr. Stoll doesn't do. Every year, Dr. Stoll hosts the very popular one-week health immersion, Dr. Stoll's Total Health Immersion in Naples, Florida. In addition to authoring several books, hosting his own daily TV and radio programs, Dr. Stoll has appeared on numerous national shows, including The Dr. Oz Show, and documentaries including Eating You Alive, Wait Till It's Free, and The Game Changers. He's also a published author and a member of the 1994 Olympic bobsled team. He's a highly sought-after international speaker, and he resides with his wife and 6 children in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Dr. Stoll.
Well, Cyrus and Robbie, thank you. It's such a great honor, and I really appreciate this opportunity to join you and your audience and to talk about this really important topic. You guys are doing such incredible work, and so I am just grateful to be able to come alongside of you and the work that you're doing to help people transform their lives.
Fantastic. I mean, I know you help so many people living with diabetes. You have over the course of your career. You continue to do so, and you're also working a lot with doctors and helping them transform the way that they're thinking. So we're going to get into a lot of detail here about each one of those aspects. The first question I got for you here is, as a former Olympic athlete and a current advising physician for professional and Olympic teams, your exercise knowledge is unparalleled. Now, in the world of diabetes, most people talk about things like food and fasting and nutrition and calories and nutrients. But very few people in the world of diabetes actually talk about exercise. And you and us know that exercise is paramount. Daily movement is incredibly important for maintaining excellent blood glucose control and also for just improving your quality of life. So can you start here by shedding some light on the importance of exercise for blood glucose control in people living with all forms of diabetes?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and we can have a great conversation around this topic. And you know, as we all know, food is really a foundation for treating diabetes and degenerative diseases, but it's also a part of a lifestyle solution. And the addition of exercise to somebody's lifestyle living with diabetes is really paramount in helping them in so many different ways. You know, first, if we understand the benefits of exercise for someone living with diabetes and managing their blood sugars, we can see that it's really additive and significantly beneficial to add an exercise. And it doesn't have to be a great deal of exercise. We're talking maybe 30 minutes a day, and we can go into a little more depth about what type of exercise and how to add that to someone's lifestyle. But it's just carving out 30 minutes a day. And finding something that you love to do to move your body, to elevate your metabolism, and especially to move your muscles. Because the real key to understanding blood glucose management for someone living with diabetes and the addition of exercise is right at those muscle cells. You know, we have these little transporters down at our muscle cells. They're like trucks. It's called the GLUT4 transporter. And so the benefit of exercise in someone with diabetes, these GLUT4 transporters are not dependent upon insulin to take blood sugar from the bloodstream into the cell. And so for both people with type 1 diabetes and people with type 2 diabetes, it allows them to dramatically lower their blood sugar levels independent of insulin. And I want to say that again because it's so important that exercise allows somebody with type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes to lower their blood sugar independent of insulin. And so you're moving your body and your muscles, and your muscles are taking blood glucose from the bloodstream and pushing it right into the muscles, and the muscles are burning it up as energy, and it facilitates a more stable blood sugar over a longer period of time, and allows people to manage their blood sugars, create stability, and avoid some of the complications of elevated blood sugar. And then there are other really profound benefits for exercising. So the blood sugar levels are more stable, more consistent, insulin requirement much lower. And because the insulin requirement is lower, the body's either producing less insulin, or the person with type 1 diabetes is using less insulin. And that also has really profound effects on health long term. We know that elevated insulin levels are associated with increased risk for cancer, increased central adiposity, because the insulin helps to fuel the growth of fat and actually grows blood vessels into the fat cells and keeps fat on the body. That fat is a metabolically active tissue that is just cranking out inflammation and estrogen and a host of inflammatory mediators in the body, increasing risk for heart disease and a number of other degenerative diseases, including eventually dementia. And so the lower insulin requirement, lower insulin production is significant for people with diabetes. And then, we'll slide over and we can start a conversation about this. Exercise, it creates neurogenesis. You grow new brain cells while you're exercising. It stabilizes angiogenesis. So you grow blood vessels into tissue that's degenerating, and you cut off blood supply from cancers and other cells that are creating excess blood vessel growth. It's opening up the arteries. It's lowering blood pressure. It's stabilizing the microbiome in the gut. It's improving the immune system. It's improving mood and serotonin. It's resolving depression. It's so many amazing beneficial things. And I'll stop there. We can continue the conversation. We'll continue adding some more beyond this, but I'd love to hear your response.
Your description of all the benefits of exercise is so clear and so amazing. I hope people are doing jumping jacks right now. Just get going, get doing it. But you talked a little bit there about the distinction between type 1 and type 2. So let's go into that a little bit further. For somebody living with type 1, what is some extra information that they should consider when doing daily exercise?
Yeah, well, first, I've been on teams, including track teams and other teams throughout the course of my athletic career, people that with type 1 diabetes. And, I have seen them mismanage their insulin requirements, end up in both camps, really low and in bad shape, or too high because they didn't manage it in anticipation. And I know because there's this kind of variability, there's some fear around exercise in people living with type 1 diabetes. And in fact, some physicians almost discourage people from type 1 diabetes exercising or doing too much exercise because they don't understand that variability of too high, too low. And so for someone living with type 1 diabetes, first I want to encourage you that you can exercise. And in fact, there's great benefit in exercising. We just talked about that GLUT4 transporter, creating greater stability in blood sugars independent of insulin. So I want to encourage you and hopefully remove that fear from your life that exercise is beneficial. You can do it, and you can do it well. You just have to be aware of a couple of things. One is, it's important to chart your blood sugars over time, and this is the benefit of also having a stable, healthy diet, because it allows for greater stability of blood sugars and a greater consistency, and therefore a greater ability to project where you're going to be pre and post exercise. Once that stability is there in your life, it's easier to begin anticipating insulin dosing pre or post exercise because you've been able to follow and chart the requirement of insulin based upon your exercise levels. It's also important to understand what type of exercise you're going to engage in, whether it's heavy weightlifting or if it's an ultra distance or a long period of time with an endurance exercise. That requires a little bit different planning around insulin and blood glucose management, and perhaps the addition of some food and snacks during that period of time that you're performing some endurance exercise. But with some careful planning and some careful charting and projections, it becomes very easy to exercise, and it enhances so many aspects of your life. And in the end, what we see is that by planning and projecting and utilizing the right amount of insulin, you in fact end up with greater stability of insulin over time through the addition of exercise.
I love how you talked about charting, because that's something we talk about constantly in Mastering Diabetes for people living with all forms of diabetes, but especially type 1. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, thank you. It's really important. Cyrus?
Yeah, so I want to go back to what you touched on earlier here, which is that, exercise doesn't just affect your muscle tissue by itself or your fat tissue or your liver tissue, but it affects all tissues simultaneously. And that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful to use as a tool for, optimizing your health as a person with diabetes, but also not necessarily only for people with diabetes. There's two things that you touched on, which I think were brilliant. The question is, how does exercise specifically affect your brain health? And then secondarily, how specifically does exercise affect your microbiome? Can you go into a little bit more detail about those two?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll start at the top with the brain. I think that's the most important. And one of the things that's really important about exercise and brain health is that, it does improve mood through the noradrenaline, through the production of serotonin. Mood dramatically improves, as does mental clarity. And with that, then improves motivation and self-care through exercise. We all know that when we're active and exercising, we feel better, and in the end, we're going to make better food choices. If we're huddled up on the couch, if we're inactive, we're much more likely to make bad food choices, which for someone living with diabetes is going to dramatically impact their blood sugars, which again is going to make them feel bad, and it perpetuates this kind of downward spiral of inactivity and bad food choices, leading to greater depression of mood and poorer choices over time. So that decision to just get up off the couch and go do something has profound effects on so many different aspects of our life. It also, and I'll just add this in, when we're exercising and we're feeling better, there's also an improvement of relational health in our lives and the people that we know. And that also participates in encouraging us then to be healthy, to make better choices, and to continue exercising. So it really has a momentous effect on kind of kindling those positive activities in our life. So the other thing with the microbiome, the research is very interesting, showing that we have these 100 trillion bacteria that live in our gut, and these bacteria are a variety of populations. In the West, we have up to 5,000 different species of bacteria, but in third world countries, they have a population of up to 20,000. So we've lost some of this biodiversity because of the environment that we live in. And there's a natural, in our Western culture, there's kind of a natural destruction of our microbiome through chlorinated water, through stress, through alcohol that we may drink, through too much caffeine, through the Western diet, sugar, fat, and salt, especially animal products can shift that microbiome in 24 hours. Through antibiotics in our food, and that's one of the greatest exposures to antibiotics is the antibiotics that are used in the production of animals. So we're eating the animals, we get the antibiotics. Antibiotics are designed to kill bacteria. They start devastating the 100 trillion bacteria in our microbiome. We get an overgrowth of these bad bacteria. Now, this is really interesting because this microbiome is responsible for 75% of the health of our immune system. And it's also responsible for the production of up to 90% of the neurotransmitters in our brain, like serotonin and GABA. And serotonin's kind of designed, and we think of it as the happy hormone. So if our microbiome is shifted and these little bacteria are not producing serotonin, we have a natural depression of mood, which again leads us back into poor choices with food, inactivity, and a host of other negative effects from that depressed mood. But exercise has been shown to begin to shift this microbiome, to improve the health of the microbiome and support the growth of the healthy bacteria that begin to overgrow and push back some of the detrimental species that live inside of our gut. And so by just simply going out and exercising, we're not only changing our cells, but we're changing those other bacteria, the cells that are not us, that actually live inside of us, and promoting a healthy microbiome and a healthy environment that works for us in every way.
Excellent. Now, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to go into detail a little bit about type 1 diabetes patients being told that they should not exercise if their blood glucose is high. Is that a good idea or is that a bad idea?
Well, if we could, that's a great question, Robbie, because there's a lot of fear around that. And I've worked with a number of athletes that, they have a high blood sugar. And so the tendency at that point is to shut down, take insulin, and sit down. But, going back to the beginning of our conversation and Cyrus's great question about exercise and diabetes, if we think back to that GLUT4 transporter that is insulin independent, so it has the ability to take glucose from the bloodstream, move it into our cells without the requirement of insulin. And then we look at this situation where we have, somebody that has high blood sugar and type 1 diabetes. We can see that if they would begin exercising, they would turn on these GLUT4 transporters. Their body would begin shifting that excess blood glucose out of the cell, out of the bloodstream and into the cells to be used as energy. And so they would be able to lower their blood glucose levels and actually require less insulin at that point in time. So it's almost, the counter is almost true in this situation, that if you have high blood sugar, it's better to begin exercising and using your muscles to help support that transition of blood sugar from the bloodstream into the cells to be used as energy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, actually, because a lot of people living with type 1 diabetes in particular tell us the same thing. Say, oh, well, my doctor said I shouldn't exercise if my blood glucose is anything over 200, 220, 250. And, the first time I heard that, I was sitting there and I was like, is there something I'm missing about why exercising with a relatively high blood glucose is dangerous? And, just like you said, it's like the fact that you can shuttle glucose from your blood into tissues, into your muscle and into your liver without the use of insulin. That's the aha moment that actually gets a lot of people to realize that exercise is a substitute for insulin. And just like you said earlier, if you have the two of them in combination, if you're eating a plant-based diet that's high in nutrient density and you're also exercising, you basically have, a double whammy that's improving your overall metabolic health.
That's right. And that's the double whammy is really important there, Cyrus, that, stable diet and exercise is really the solution, because I've also worked with athletes that, are exercising but have a really crummy diet, and even their pre-exercise diet is poor, and they end up in all kinds of challenges, pre and post or mid and post exercise because of the food they're eating, leading up to that exercise bout. So you really need to have both as a firm foundation.
Exactly right. So that's a perfect segue into the next question here about the differences between plant-based diets and low carbohydrate diets. So most people living with any form of diabetes, whether type 1 or type 2, they're told to eat a low carbohydrate diet because carbohydrate is bad for you, and carbohydrate's going to stimulate insulin secretion, and insulin's going to make you fat. So most people around the world living with any form of diabetes are sort of they're told to eat a low carbohydrate diet, and they follow that recommendation. And a lot of the thinking in this field is that if you're eating a low carbohydrate diet, then you're eating a higher proportion of total dietary fat. So you're consuming fat. Then when you go and exercise, you're burning fat. And effectively, you're operating in this sort of fat economy. Say, oh, don't worry about it because you are burning lots of fat. And so that's a good thing. And that's going to help you from becoming overweight and more diabetic over time. So can you go into a little bit of detail here about what are the flaws? First of all, let me back up. Is that true? That if you're operating in this fat-rich economy, that you eat fat and you burn fat, everything's fine? And secondarily, are there any flaws associated with that mindset?
Yeah, that is a really great question, because that is, it's so pertinent to so many of the conversations that we all are having every day with people living with diabetes, because it's such a prominently promoted dietary strategy in our culture today. And certainly because it seems so enjoyable. You're eating all the foods that really we've been told not to eat. It's all the fatty foods and all the foods that seem to really hit that crave button for so many people.
Yep.
But, when we look at the way that our body operates, I try to always go back to like the default. Our body really operates best and was originally designed to operate on the glucose efficiency model. And this whole kind of ketogenic, it was really designed as a strategy for, starvation, low caloric, periods of time. And so it was a way, to survive during those episodes. But then the body always reverts back to its kind of baseline, which is operating on glucose. And so if we look at the default model and we believe that that glucose strategy for our system and our body and our brain, because 60% of the energy for our brain and our heart is always glucose, then we have to say, well, what's the fault? Why is this a fault to continue to promote this ketogenic high-fat diet? What are the detriments for doing this long term? And I think what we see in people that are on this ketogenic diet, and the short-term research actually shows that they can improve their blood sugar and they can improve some biomarkers, but these are all short-term studies. And I think what I've seen is that, they end up pushing themselves, and the gap for their control gets smaller and smaller. And so they operate on this very fine line between, managing blood sugars and then falling completely over the edge and being out of control. And if they were to step out of that high-fat diet that they've been on for a long period of time, because there's so little margin, if they add any carbohydrates into that high-fat diet, their sugars start to go out of control and their whole system begins to spiral. And so while it may show in the research that they can maintain this, they're really on a dangerous fine line for developing a host of other problems. And then if we just step back and look at all of the research on complex carbohydrates and the benefits of eating what we call complex carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables, beans and lentils, these beautiful whole plant foods, they're missing out on this rich abundance of phytochemicals and antioxidants, which have been shown to prevent and reverse disease, alter DNA damage, reduce inflammation, turn off inflammatory cascades, promote the optimal growth of blood vessels into damaged tissue and cut off blood supply from cancer cells, grow new brain cells, reverse heart disease, stabilize blood sugars, optimize the microbiome. It affects every system positively long term through the addition of these complex carbohydrates. The other issue with ketogenic diets is that they're short on fiber. Their question to us always is, well, where do you get your protein? And that's an easy one to answer. But the question to them is, where do you get your fiber? And that's not an easy one for them to answer because they are grossly deficient in fiber. And there's a huge body of evidence on the benefits of fiber in preventing disease. And we know that the benefits are really because fiber comes packaged with plant-based foods, but fiber also whisks away excess estrogen and cholesterol that we don't need in our gut. It just cleans us out and helps to balance those elements in our body. And so for someone on a ketogenic diet, they're terribly deficient in fiber, putting themselves at risk for colon cancer and a number of other diseases. And then their systems are not operating efficiently because they're deficient in these vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals that we find in plant-based foods. We also know that saturated fat is an inflammatory mediator in the body, increasing the risk for a host of cancers and heart disease. And we also know that fat, because of the research, is one of the things that drives insulin resistance over time. So when consuming more fat, they begin storing fat both in the liver and storing fat intramuscularly in the intramyocellular fat storage, which disrupts insulin signaling, leading to greater insulin resistance over time. And so that's that reason that gap gets smaller and smaller over time that we just talked about, that as they're eating more fat, they're developing more insulin resistance, and it becomes more and more imperative that they keep that high-fat diet. Any step outside of that, with that insulin resistance that's been growing in their liver and their muscles, causes a spike in insulin resistance and some real challenges for them long-term.
Excellent. So I'd like to switch gears here a little bit and talk to you about the Plantrition project that you created. What is it? Why did you create it? And what effect is it having on doctors around the world?
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. I appreciate that very much. When I started this journey almost 15 years ago as a physician, I spent thousands of hours trying to just figure it out for myself, reading books and articles, and then trying to understand how do I take everything that I just learned and use it in my daily practice to help my patients transform their diets and their lifestyles. And how do I manage medications? How do I taper medications? Which ones can I taper? How do I communicate this information to my patients in a meaningful way that they'll be inspired to actually do it? How do I come alongside of them and helping them to implement these lifestyle changes in a culture that's not supportive, all these questions. And so I was talking with my friend Tom Dunham one night, and I said, what we really need to do is we need to start a conference to start teaching doctors how to do this, and teaching them the science so that they don't have to spend all the hours that I've just spent, doing this for themselves. And so we started a conference called the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference. And then around that, we created a not-for-profit called the Plantrition Project, whose mission it is to equip and empower and educate and inspire physicians and healthcare providers around the world to utilize whole food plant-based nutrition and lifestyle to prevent, suspend, and reverse disease. And I think that's the most hopeful message, is that we can actually suspend and reverse disease, as we all know, with a whole food plant-based diet. And that's the greatest opportunity in medicine, is to sit there with a patient and tell them, I can help you, I can solve your problem, and I can change your life by helping you change what you put on your plate. And so we started the Plantrition Project, and our conference has grown. This last year we had about 1,000 healthcare providers from 20 different countries that attended. We've created a new journal called the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention that will become a repository of all the science of plant-based nutrition, so that people that are looking to understand plant-based nutrition, to understand some of these more detailed questions, can go to this journal, which is open access and free to everyone, and begin learning the science for themselves. And also that it will help to ask the right questions and develop more research to clarify some of the things that we don't yet know, because that will be really important, I think, in the greater acceptance of a whole food plant-based diet by the healthcare system. And then we have this really neat project that we started about 1.5 years ago with the Rodale Institute called the Regenerative Health Institute. And I was actually taking care of the executive director from the Rodale Institute, treating his rotator cuff tendonitis with some PRP. And I shared with him one of my visions was to start an education center on a farm that would help people to understand that healthy soil creates healthy plants. When we eat healthy plants, we get healthy people. And when we have healthy people and this whole ecosystem, we have a healthy world that we can give as a legacy to the generations that follow us. And so it will be about a 30,000 square foot health education center that will teach people about healthy living soil and healthy plants and all the science around that, and healthy healthcare systems and a healthy environment, and how all of it eventually comes back to the choices that we decide when we're creating our plates every day.
I love this, actually. And, Robbie and I have both been to the Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference multiple years now. And I can safely say, I'm not just saying this because we're on an interview with you, but it's one of my favorite conferences, period. I feel like the enthusiasm that the doctors bring to the table and the top-notch speakers that you invite to actually speak at the conference is like, it's very transformative. And no matter how much you know or how much you don't know, there's always something new to be learned about how plant-based nutrition can truly affect your patients' lives, your members' lives, and help you sort of teach other people how to make the transition towards a whole food plant-based diet. So my question to you really is, what type of reception have you gotten from doctors who are now part of the Plantrition Project?
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comments about the conference. I just love that conference, not because we actually, create it because it's a lot of work, but I love to see healthcare providers come together. And it's like that aha moment that, this is why I went into healthcare, because I want to see people's lives changed. I want to help people. And now I actually have solutions for patients that will improve the quality of their lives. And so I see that it's a moment of hope and encouragement, inspiration for physicians. And for those that come and those that we have reached all around the world, there is great enthusiasm and excitement to take it back and implement it into their lifestyle as a practitioner. And one of the challenges that we do face, that we're trying to help people overcome right now, is the healthcare system is built on volume-dependent care and procedures. And that's what is actually reimbursed and paid for today. And so now we're adding, these kind of two contradictory ideas, where this plant-based is value-based care, and certainly not volume, and definitely not pills and procedures. How do people get actually paid to do that? And so, we're in this kind of the time where, it's a little bit challenging because, the value-based care is just on the way up and the volume-based care is on the way down. And we're trying to help people meet that need of how to practice medicine, still get paid for what they do, what they believe in now with value-based care, in a system that's not yet recognized that improvement. But the good news is that, CEOs around the country of healthcare systems are recognizing that value-based care is on the way. That will be the eventual system. That's the only way that we can sustain ourselves. And so we're kind of early to the market on that.
I must add that it has been really fun to see the growth of the conference over the past few years. I think you had well over 1,000 people this most previous one. And I also got to say the food is amazing.
Yeah, thank you. That was one of our visions, Robbie. Food is so important, and we really wanted people that come to the conference to be able to sit around the table, enjoy a good meal, and have conversation, because that's really where change takes place, is all of these amazing, talented, intelligent people getting together for 3 or 4 days and sharing meals and sharing ideas, talking about research projects, encouraging, sharing resources, because we believe that that's what it's going to take to actually begin transforming healthcare. It's not just one person. This is the power of community and unity in bringing about transformation.
Couldn't agree with you more. One thing that a lot of our clients and our members tell us is that, when they're living with diabetes and they go to their doctor and communicate about their dietary changes, they say, oh, I'm thinking about doing a plant-based diet, or I currently am, eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet. A lot of the times their doctor either A, looks at them as if they have 4 eyes, or B, sometimes puts up a little bit of sort of a confrontation, and it becomes a somewhat tension-filled relationship. So given your experience in educating doctors and working with doctors and really trying to pave the way for doctors to learn more about the actual evidence, do you have any pro tips for helping people living with diabetes communicate with their doctors in a non-confrontational manner?
I do. And that's a great question. First, I think it's important for people that become enlightened about a whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle and want to pursue that as their solution. I think that, the important understanding is that, doctors aren't trained and they just don't know. And so it's really important to be able to tell your physician the information in a kind, compassionate, and loving way. And if they don't get it the first time, or if you meet resistance, to not take it personally, to not take offense in that situation, and to just tell yourself, it's okay because they just don't know yet. And I think that little bit of understanding, that little bit of grace towards your healthcare provider makes all the difference in the world. I have seen that, if a person comes in and shares that information with their healthcare provider, and the first time they share the information, the healthcare provider comes back with some resistance, and the person then meets the resistance with resistance, the relationship begins to break down. In reality, the opportunity is, as somebody that is enlightened and understands the power of a plant-based diet, bringing that to the healthcare provider, and the healthcare provider doesn't receive it the first time, but you offer grace and you keep the relationship. I have seen opportunities, 2 or 3 visits down the road where the healthcare provider says, you know what, you really are changing. I have never seen this before. Tell me again what you're doing. And so, rather than being militant about it, or rather than being defensive or taking offense in those early meetings, look at it as an opportunity to lead with grace, and that you are maybe that missing link for your healthcare provider. You're the one that's going to bring transformation to their lives because they just don't know and they haven't been trained. And as healthcare providers, we sometimes can slip into that place of being prideful, like we've been trained, we know all of these things, and it's hard for us to receive information from a layperson. But I will tell you that most healthcare providers are looking to improve the quality of their care. And most healthcare providers are open to new information. It just takes them a little while. So you can be the key to unlocking your healthcare provider's understanding of whole food plant-based nutrition and changing so many lives if you can lead with grace in those early meetings.
I love this so much. It's really one of our missions at Mastering Diabetes is to empower our members to actually educate their doctors, and they can have an even bigger impact by impacting their doctor and then countless patients after that. So it's really beautiful. All right, so as a final question here, we'd like to give our viewers and listeners some practical advice to take with them. So when it comes to exercise, can you give some recommendations on what type of exercise to perform, how often? The audience would love to hear that.
Yeah, the first thing I recommend is just find something that you love to do. Whatever it is. If you like playing tennis, find places to play tennis, indoors or outdoors. If you like walking, find places to walk. If you like playing with children, go outside and play with children. If you like lifting weights, buy some weights for your bedroom. Whatever it is you like to do, find it and do it. And you don't have to start with a lot of activity. Start with something simple and just do it consistently for a number of days. There's lots of opportunities to do like 5 and 7 minute workouts. And I find that those are great ways to begin taking those first steps in exercise, being consistent. And when we do little things and we do it consistently, it really builds transformative change and momentum in our lives. And so, little things like putting your exercise shoes by the side of your bed at night. So when you wake up in the morning, you put on your exercise shoes and your sweats. That little step in the morning can make all the difference in actually accomplishing your exercise goal. Or, sometimes scheduling yourself with an exercise coach or scheduling a workout with a friend. That simple step of connecting with somebody and committing makes all the difference in developing that strategy in your life. And so, whenever we decide what kind of exercise we do, the most important thing is setting yourself up for success and taking little steps and making those steps consistent over 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, celebrating your success, and then increasing that success to the next level. And I think those are the most critical things that people can do. Sometimes we set too big of goals in the beginning and we say, I'm going to exercise an hour, I'm going to lift weights and get on the exercise. We can do it, and then we get busy and we lose track of that, and then we often condemn ourselves for not keeping it up, and then we slide back. But it's small, consistent steps with celebration along the way and accountability and support systems that I think are most important.
Yeah, I actually really like the fact that you touch on consistency here, because one of the things that we tell people all the time is that the most important aspect of your overall exercise regimen is being consistent. I'd much rather you exercise for 30 minutes, 6 days a week than trying to do 3 hours on the weekend and nothing for the next 6 days. So this consistency aspect of your exercise regimen is paramount. And just like you're saying, even if you do small chunks, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, it can really build up to a point where exercise becomes normal. It becomes
right.
A routine. And then when you're not performing exercise, that's when it starts to feel weird. And that's maybe when you can see the difference on your blood glucose meter, or maybe you get tired, or maybe you just don't feel right. And when you've gotten to that point where exercise actually feels totally normal, that's part of your integrated routine, then you are truly one of the most consistent, or you're adding consistency, which is truly benefiting your life.
That's right. And I think something that, you all do, I know, is exercise with somebody that you care about. That makes it so much more fun. It doesn't have to be an alone activity. It can be with a significant other, a spouse. It can be with your children. It can be with a friend. It can be with a parent, a brother. If we do it together, that relationship has a really profound effect and impact on the exercise and the level of consistency.
Yeah, 100%. If we haven't said so already, Dr. Stoll, we totally appreciate the time that you've taken to be with us here today. And also, the time that you've taken over the course of your career to really pave the way for doctors. Because just like you said, doctors, they were not given the tools to understand nutrition, especially from an evidence-based perspective in medical school. And therefore, we can't necessarily rely on them to have that information, later in their career. The fact that you are now allowing doctors the opportunity to learn evidence-based nutrition is something that's truly exceptional. So thank you for all your efforts. And, I really see the Plant-Based Nutrition and Health Conference growing over time and really becoming a true revolution over the course of the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. No question.
Well, thank you, Cyrus and Robbie. And I just want to applaud all that you're doing. Your Mastering Diabetes is really masterful. And I believe that you all have the essence of what it really takes to create lasting change for people. You have done such an incredible job of synthesizing the science into real, practical, achievable steps for people. And you're both incredible communicators of that message. And so I applaud you and I honor you for all that you're doing. And any way that I can be of support with your work, it is a great pleasure for me to do so. So thank you for allowing me to do this and to be a part of this, this amazing summit.